I rise today in debate on Bill C2, a 160-page omnibus bill from the Liberal government that raises serious concerns about the capacity of this government to address several crises of their own making. These were not problems prior to the Liberal government taking office in 2015. A rapid influx of migrants that Canada's social and economic infrastructure could not sustain, an open and porous border, and an illegal drug production, trafficking, and addiction crisis. I'd like to start with the issue of Canada's fentanyl crisis because it's important context for new colleagues to understand how we got here. A decade of ultra-progressive policies juiced a deadly problem that really came into prevalence in late 2015. At that time, precisely the same time that the Canadian political landscape already changed, Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had a farther left platform, putting it mildly, than his predecessor government. And in 2017, an ultra-left version of the NDP, led by the late Premier John Horgan, formed government at the subnational level in the province of British Columbia, a region hardest hit by the drug. Prior to 2015, right-of-centre governments favoured a crackdown on criminal activity related to the emerging problem of fentanyl, coupled with enhanced recovery programs for addicts. But Trudeau's incoming government, as well as Horgan's in British Columbia, all had long-held beliefs that so-called harm reduction, taxpayer-funded hard drugs, and the effective legalization of hard drug possession were superior public policy alternatives on hard drug crime to those of their predecessors on the political right. So between 2015 and 2023, these governments went on to usher in a dramatic shift away from government policy that focused on criminalizing hard drug production and trafficking. At the federal level, the Liberal government expanded access to hard drug injection sites, ended mandatory minimum penalties for major hard drug offences, softened bail criteria for all crimes, including those related to production and trafficking of hard drugs. A current sitting Liberal Member of Parliament even went as far as to table a bill which aimed to fully legalize all hard street drugs across the country. Then in 2021, British Columbia's NDP government formally applied for a Section 56(1) exemption under Canada's Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, requesting permission to effectively legalize possession of hard drugs, including fentanyl. In early 2022, Trudeau's federal Liberal government approved the request and allowed for a 3-year pilot program. The program was expansive. The government even went as far as to set guidelines that would have allowed recreational fentanyl to be legally provided to children. The results were deadly. There are people across the aisle who will get their backs up on this situation, but the reason why we have zombie-like people walking across the streets of urban Canada and in rural Canada, our mothers, our daughters, our husbands, everybody from every demographic has been touched by the crisis that was caused by these extremely failed, ill-sighted policies that literally everybody was telling them were wrong, but they persisted. And so today we have this omnibus bill in front of us that is making Canadians once again, as they did in the former Parliament with Bill C-63, the so-called online harms bill, it is trying to suggest that Canadians, a false dichotomy, that Canadians have to choose between their civil liberties and fixing epic messes with deadly consequences that the Liberal government set up. And that is a false dichotomy and something that this place should reject. I'm going to briefly talk about two components of the bill. I'm going to talk about some of the border issues and immigration, and then I want to talk about the civil liberties component very briefly. This bill is a missed opportunity on the fentanyl and addiction crisis to address the real problems of how we got here. The Liberals' catch-and-release bail policies, they could have tabled a bill on that, but they didn't. So we're now forced to review this omnibus legislation without understanding whether or not the Liberals are going to address the true cause of this problem, the fact that they do not penalize people that produce these drugs. They could have increased penalties for people who produce these drugs. As the leader of the Conservative Party said during the election, these are mass murderers. They should be treated as such. And the Liberals also failed to put in place compassionate measures that would allow for a life-saving intervention for people who have lost agency due to addiction. These are the measures that we need to actually stop the drug production crisis in Canada. Are there other things? Sure. Are there things in this bill that Parliament could look at? Sure. But again, the Liberals have purposely structured a bill where Canadians have to choose between their civil liberties and trying to fix a deadly mess that the Liberals made. On immigration, a little history for colleagues that are new to this place. Canada has the Canadian consensus on immigration can be boiled down to this. Do not bring more people into the country that our social and economic infrastructure can handle. And by that I mean our healthcare system, education system, capacity to provide language acquisition, our healthcare system, and provide jobs, housing as well too. Right? That's the basic consensus that our pluralism is based on, because if people are housed, if they have access to work, if they have access to health care, and they can speak one of Canada's official languages, then pluralism can be maintained. But the Liberals broke that promise. In 2017, I remember in 2016, first of all, the Liberal government essentially implied I was racist for suggesting that the Liberals should not raise or lift the visa requirement on Mexico because there would be false asylum claims made. And guess what? It was like I was Cassandra, doomed to know the future and have the Liberals call me racist. Honestly, what did the Liberals have to do last year? Reverse the visa imposition on Mexico. Then the next Cassandra moment. Hey, maybe we shouldn't let people who have reached the safety of upstate New York illegally cross the border into Canada and then claim benefits here while their asylum claims, which will likely be rejected, linger for years in Canada's broken asylum system, which they broke. And guess what? I said, hey, maybe we should close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. Once again, the implication was that Canada was anti-immigrant. Anybody who was suggesting that we restore order and balance and fairness, because there are people who apply legally to come into Canada who do everything right and are waiting for years and never get the chance to come here or want their children to come here, and they literally rolled out the red carpet at Roxham. There was a literal red carpet with the RCMP, if you remember, pulling the luggage across the border, and hashtag welcome to Canada. What do you think happened when they hashtag welcome to Canada people who were already in upstate New York? They literally enabled an industry of people. There were literally human traffickers telling people how to make their way through into Canada. So what happened? Our asylum system was broken. It was abused. So now they've got this bill, which has a few minor provisions, which does a couple of things that I'm concerned about. It delegates more authority to the minister in vague ways, and it delegates more responsibility into regulation. If there are problems with the system, why aren't they just laying it out in this legislation and making it clear so that we don't have endless judicial appeals, which is also part of the problem here, is that people can appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal because of too much authority put into the minister, vagueness, and an endless changing regulatory structure, right? That's part of the problem here too. Now, I need to look at this bill in more detail on those provisions to understand what's happening here. And frankly, the minister's performance in question period, good Lord, get someone to practice with you. This is not going to get easier for you. Seriously, this is too big of an issue. She needs to be able to understand and explain why Canadians should vest more power in a minister who doesn't even know numbers that are on her own website. So, but the bigger problem that I have with the immigration provisions in this bill is that they don't address the bigger problem, which is facing Canada's immigration system right now, which is the government does not track exits. Did you know that? Did you know that the government does not actually coordinate information to track when people leave the country, and they don't publicly disclose when people who are, let's say, on expired visas or who have deportation orders actually leave? There's no way for parliamentarians to look into the data and go, has the government actually enabled people to leave the country when they have no legal right to be here? So what happens in that situation? Well, first of all, it sends a message to the world that you can have all of the processing on the front end, but there's no consequence on the back end if you do not have a legal right to be in the country, right? It incents people to come here because they know the system can be abused. The second thing that happens is that it pushes people underground. It creates an underground economy. We have to have empathy for people who come to Canada because there is a promise of Canada. We can't blame the housing crisis, the healthcare crisis, the jobs crisis on people who are drawn to our country, our pluralism, by every promise that makes it good. We have to blame the Liberal government for failing the system so badly that people feel their only option is to go underground into an underground economy where they live in slave-like working conditions. And that happens here in Canada, and it happens because this Liberal government has failed so profoundly on this file. Minister after minister, minister after minister for a decade. The fact that in this bill they didn't have any sort of plan to departure track, to coordinate information across departments that already gather this information, and also to express to Canadians and people who are here on expired visa how they will enable them to leave the country is only going to exacerbate the problem, particularly with the vagueness in some of these provisions. That is a huge problem, Mr. Speaker. And again, I don't understand why the Liberals would have put this border component, all of these missed opportunities, and the immigration component into a bill with the following: some pretty big poison pills when it comes to civil liberties that every Canadian should be concerned about. If passed, Bill C-2 would allow CSIS, police, and peace officers to demand personal information from online service providers without a warrant, based only on vague suspicions of potential crimes or legal breaches, based on any act of Parliament. Now, the Liberals today, they've said, oh, no, that's not personal information. Don't worry about it, folks. But guess what? Whether or not I use an online service, where I use an online service, if I depart from an online service, if I start an online service, how long I used an online service, everything that C2 says it would do, that is my personal information. That is none of the government's business, certainly not without a warrant. There has to be a line drawn here, right? Come on. Now, this government has severely under-resourced our information gathering departments. They have, sure, it takes time to get a warrant. But most police departments, after defund the police, are so underfunded, they don't have cyber crimes units. So now what they're trying to do is shortcut this by taking away the civil liberties of law-abiding Canadians. And that's not right. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, like anything else this government does when it comes to removing civil liberties, it is law-abiding Canadians that get punished, not the criminals. When I read this bill, what I see is a roadmap of ways for criminals to avoid being tracked on where they could legally do this snooping stuff. So what's going to happen? Hardened criminals that understand how to get around the system are going to get around the system, and then a government who unlawfully used the Emergencies Act and froze Canadians' bank accounts, introduced Bill C-11, Bill C-18, censorship bills, Bill C-63. Can you imagine if they retable Bill C-63 with all of their suspicion of hate crime stuff? That bill would couple with this bill to form mega Voltron of censorship and oppression. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. This government has over and over again, every opportunity, taken opportunities to take away Canadians' freedom of speech. Every bill that they have passed has been designed to control speech. I don't think, and my constituents should not have to choose and make that choice. They should not. And I know what happened here. I'm going to bet what happened. I know what happened with this bill. Some of these departments have had this policy sitting on the shelf, literally for years. And more savvy ministers have said, not today. More savvy PMOs have said, But you have a Green minister, a Green prime minister, and a perfect cover, the fentanyl crisis, right? So some bureaucrats were like, oh, yeah, you know what, this is harmonizing with other things. It's not going to have a big implication on Canadian civil liberties. And these guys fell for it. They didn't politically question this. They didn't think about what was in the best interest of their constituents. You know how I know? They didn't put a charter statement in for this, right? I can't wait to see that charter statement. It's going to be dance, dance, kitty dance. I'm sure of it. I am positive. Because the information that I talked about there is personal information. And even if this bill passes, I guarantee you it will be challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court. Not just that, my colleagues have talked about Canada Post opening the mail. Was Canada Post consulted on this provision? I heard they weren't. My colleagues heard that Canada Post found out about this after the bill was tabled. How are Canada Post employees going to deal with opening up fentanyl envelopes? That's new. What about the telco companies that this provision affects, right? It's giving them unfettered, there's things in here that give the government unfettered access into telecommunications companies. I'm no fan of Canada's telcos oligopoly, but where we can agree to agree is that I do not want this Liberal government further inserting itself into the management of Canada's telecommunications companies. There's another concerning component as well, too, that I saw this morning. The International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group is sounding the alarm about provisions in Bill C-2 with respect to powers to allow the government to request information from foreign entities. This raises an important question. Will the government allow for reciprocal requests from foreign governments? Okay, so now the government is saying, all right, well, let's say they pass C-63 as well, too. Even if they don't, that they can have these snooping provisions, but now they're letting foreign governments reciprocate on snooping provisions with all the foreign influence stuff that we've had without a foreign agent registry, under this geopolitical situation. The fact that there's nothing in the bill that says what this means is crazy. Also, the government has not shown Canadians any specific situation, any specific evidence or circumstance in granular detail about why we should be giving up our civil liberties to a government that unlawfully used the Emergencies Act and has imposed draconian censorship bills, which has resulted in news bans in this country. I won't do it. I think the one thing that all of my colleagues from all opposition parties can agree is this. There are elements in this bill that are worthy of further study that might help fix the mess that the Liberals have made. But we should not have to choose between civil liberties and keeping our country safe. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. Member for Sarnia-Lambton-Piquet-Jouan.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, and I hope everybody in this House listens carefully to what she has to say, because she's got a lot of experience with a lot of legislation, and everything that she said is right on the money. But I want to follow up on some of the civil liberties issues that she was pointing out, and ask her about some of the things that are in the bill that don't just impact on people's privacy rights, but also some of the language that's in the bill that talks about if they suspect money laundering, that they could potentially get your financial information, which of course gives shades of the freezing of the bank accounts issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Again, the government put this bill out and didn't explain to Canadians specific instances or why Canadians should be giving these things up. I don't think we should be giving these things up, but it is completely unreasonable for the government to just say, just trust us, when there's an entire burden of proof that we shouldn't. This is a government that, even I remember the former finance minister, during her description about why they unlawfully used the Emergencies Act, she essentially said it was to suspend the rights for financial transactions for Canadians, right? I mean, come on. The whole promise of Canada is freedom, and we don't have.
Questions, comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it's truly amazing how the member stands up, and it's literally riddled with conspiracy theories. And from all extremes. Seriously. You get the impression you're going to get Canada Post workers opening up every envelope that comes through. Canadians, be aware that this is going to happen type of thing. As if she's giving a warning to every Canadian. She needs to actually get a grip on real life, Mr. Speaker. Even the Police Association of Canada has come out saying this is good legislation and they're looking forward to seeing it pass. Mr. Speaker, she criticizes and takes attacks on the Minister of Immigration. She was there when Stephen Harper and Jason Kennedy actually canceled the parents' sponsorship program, not to mention deleted hundreds of thousands of files that were under process. They had a broken system too, Madam Speaker. At least we're trying to balance it. The question to the member is, when will she get real?
Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
If 2025 me traveled back in time to 2015 and said, the government is going to use the Emergencies Act to freeze Canadians' bank accounts and introduce a bill to criminalize thought crimes and cause news bans and cause, I would go, what? But that's exactly what happened. So you know what? Call me skeptical, but any bill that has provisions that gives the government more power to take away my right to free speech and my constituents' right to free speech, I'm saying no.
Je vais juste rappeler des députés que...
A reminder to members, if they wish to ask a question, they must be seated in their seats.
L'honorable député de Beauharnois,
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois, Salaberry-Soulanges, Huntington. My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the reminder. I listened closely to my colleague's speech. I'm sure that she, like I, is currently worried about how lax this government is currently when it comes to firearms control. We know that illegal firearms are entering Canada from the United States, usually by waterways. Would the member agree to give more authorities and powers to the Coast Guard so that they can monitor and document the situation and inform authorities about certain areas or passages where there are illegal firearms? Does the colleague agree with that aspect of this bill?
Again, as I said, there are elements of this bill which are worthy of study that could make things safer. The problem is that the Liberals have once again forced all of us, including my colleague, into a situation where we're supposed to choose between civil liberties and protecting, protecting our constituents. So I'm hoping that there can be some sort of resolution here that doesn't involve that choice. I hope the government will be open to looking for ways to do that. So some of the, what could be deemed acceptable bill, components of the bill could be studied, perhaps passed, but also just saying on some of this other stuff that is clearly going to cause contention among everybody, that perhaps they shouldn't have put that in the bill.
For Courtney Alberni.
I thank my colleague for her excellent speech. And Mr. Speaker, she highlighted that there's many concerns in this bill that will trample on people's civil liberties, privacy, due process, and procedural fairness. But also the powers that are granted in this bill to different authorities include cabinet. They're sweeping and there's little details provided. So in addition, it's effectively an omnibus bill, Mr. Speaker. So through you to my colleague, does she believe that there's parts of this bill that should be separated out? Clearly, this is a bill that they've thrown everything in, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to hear from her on her thoughts on that. Thank you.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
I think we're getting somewhere here, and I'm sure that my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois also have concerns about some of the deep incursions into provincial jurisdiction as well. Therefore, I do think that, again, we're getting some consensus and debates here that there might, like C-63. In C-63, there were provisions about increased reporting requirements for child pornography. There might be a few things in this bill we could agree on, or at least agree to study. But there's some that are they are out of scope, and they're designed to make us choose a false dichotomy. So hopefully there can be something that resembles work here, that the government understands that they have put a dog's breakfast forward, and that they can somehow work something out to try again.
The honourable member for Oakville West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier today, during the debate, my Conservative colleague cited that the crime statistics from 2022, a year when rates were at their peak. However, I find this disingenuous, as crime rates, especially auto theft, have dropped in 2024 by 20% nationwide, and as per Toronto Police, 39% in 2025 and 19% decline in Oakville in 2025. Mr. Speaker, my constituents know that I have been actively advocating on the issue of crime. It is a matter of concern for the residents of Oakville West as well, and for me as well. During the election, I spoke to many constituents, and some were the victims of the auto theft. Okay, stolen cars are transported across the border, which is...
Sorry, I do have to give time to the member to respond. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
I don't think...
Question's been asked, Mr.
I don't think there's anyone in Oakville West who would think that going from absolutely crazy, insane levels of car theft to like mucho extra crazy levels of car theft is acceptable. That's the problem, is that they're trying to say it's dropped, but it's still out of control. There are people in Oakville who have to buy ballasts in front of their cars because their cars get stolen. She talked about detection of cars. The Liberal government can't detect cars going out of a port. We've got drone warfare happening, and we can't even detect stolen cars in the Port of Montreal. Ugh.
Comments. The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. And I was going to raise a point of order, but I know that my colleague is more than capable of dealing with this. The member from Winnipeg said something I think that was deeply offensive to this House and was completely unparliamentary when he's essentially telling my colleague to get real when all she is doing is citing facts. This at a time, Mr. Speaker, when we were told by a cabinet member that Canada Post would need a warrant to open up mail. And I'm going to read directly from the bill. The corporation may open any mail if it has reasonable grounds to suspect that. Reasonable grounds to suspect, not even to believe. He should be apologizing. Shame on him.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Yeah, I doubt that the honourable member that made the comment my colleague referred to has actually read the bill, because he didn't. This is what the bill says. And as my colleague across the way mentioned, there are some provisions, not that, which could actually ostensibly maybe help fix the mess that the Liberals themselves created. But there are some things in there that are so egregious that I think they put it in there specifically to have a poison pill. And that means that they're not serious about solving these issues and that they want them to continue. So if the Liberals were serious about addressing these issues, they wouldn't have put, as they did in C-63, poison pill civil liberties issues in there to bottleneck up this Parliament. And so I encourage all colleagues in this place to go to the minister and say, this is a dog's breakfast. Let's figure this out. Thank you.
Resuming debate.